So let's get going here, and Thomas will eventually get some video. Because I haven't seen Thomas in a long time. And anyway, the first two topics today are kind of unique, and so for that reason, I want to preface them by saying that anything this may give you a little more freedom to say what you want to say. Anything we say in the discussion on topics 1 and 2, which is what I'm calling PTSD for martial artists, nothing said is legal advice. If you're viewing this and you want legal advice, you need to check with an attorney in your state. Because we may be making suggestions on things to do. However, none of that should be interpreted as legal advice. Yeah. Now that I think we have done a CYA, is there anyone who does not know what CYA means? Okay, good. Let's get going here. And I don't know how many of you have had students who have been in this situation. So if you have, one of the first things I'm going to ask is, please let me know. And the question is, how many of you have had students that have had actual street confrontations or been attacked?
This is Thomas. I have.
You have, okay. Anyone else?
It seems like Darren had some experience.
Who has?
Darren.
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
you have had students? Or
yes.
Okay, Darren, I'm just jotting these down because these are the people I want to hear from first before we really get into this, because it may change the direction somewhat. Anyone else?
I've only had personal experience for myself, but it's also I've heard stories from other instructors when they speak about other students that have street confrontations.
Okay. Okay, so there are 3 or 4 of us. So what I want to do first is, and I'm going to ask each of you, when these students came to you and told you about what happened, what was their attitude? How were they feeling? I know these are all subjective things. Were they upset? Were they scared? Were they surprised that it worked? I kind of need, what, as instructors, what were your experiences in responding to your students' needs or what they said? So let's start out with Thomas.
Actually, mine was a student who had taken my class, been in our class for a while, and then moved to New York City. And I received a letter from her a year or 2 later. And this had been a situation where somebody had followed her up to her apartment and was trying to follow her into her apartment. And her response was to prevent him from coming in. It became physical. She kneed him in the groin, closed the door, and called the police. And her attitude when in the email was very appreciative of the training that she had, because she didn't think she had the confidence to actually do anything but freeze.
Okay.
So no particular technique. It was just, you can do something. And that's what that's what she got out of the class, and that's what she was appreciative of.
Okay. Thomas and Dave just joined us. We're on the first part of the PTSD topic. I prefaced it by saying that anything we're saying today is not legal advice. And if someone who is watching this video needs legal advice, they need to consult an attorney in their state.
I would also like to include that this is also not medical advice as well.
Right. There's also no medical advice, and just to be, either, because I don't believe any of us are qualified physicians or licensed in every state or whatever the criteria are. And the question I've put forth: have any of you had students who have been in street situations and they came to you afterwards, and what happened in that discussion or communication? Okay, before I get into it, okay, because it may change how I deal with some of the topics. Okay, David, Tom, any students of yours that have been in street situations or conflicts?
Fortunately not, no.
Okay.
Well, unfortunately for me, yes. Wow, where do I begin? I have one student who had studied with our dojo for 5 months. And this person had a friend of the family staying with them, and the rest of the family left, and he was home alone with this friend of the family. And this friend of the family basically attempted a homosexual rape. And this student used a combination of 2 techniques that they learned in the 5 months they'd studied with us, and rather creatively combined both of those techniques to end it very quickly. But they were on the ground with the person on top of them and escaped. Did not tell his parents for a full week, did not tell me for a full 2 weeks, was slow to talk and uncomfortable about the whole thing. And I basically was supportive from a standpoint of listening and hearing everything he had to say, and then saying you did the right thing, and I'm impressed that you combined those 2 techniques, especially since we had never combined those 2 in the dojo. Congratulations on being successful, and sorry that you had to endure it. And he says, well, I'm thankful that I had the wherewithal and the knowledge to escape. I said, what would it have been like if you didn't? He says, it would not have ended the way it ended. So, it's sad that it happened. It's heartwarming to know that he took the initiative to get the training and then was able to use the training. The only other time I've had people come to me are adults who, after studying for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, will come to me and say after class, I just want to tell you about a life experience. And they'll tell me about having been sexually assaulted or mugged years earlier, back in their college days. And I don't know why they want to open up at that point, why they chose it, other than they feel like it's a safe place to vent. And so I listen and console and let it go at that.
Okay. Okay, I don't want to cut you off here, but I'm going to get 3 other people in so we can get going here. And I got some good things from you. I'm already seeing some consistencies. Darren.
Yes, sensei. Yes, sensei.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, you want me to go? Yeah. So I've had a couple of students that have had altercations in different perspectives. They would range from the typical family outing to having be able to defend themselves out in a public area, or even law enforcement practitioners that I work with. And for the most part, the biggest consistency that they've all had was some of the things that they thought that they were doing with technique that they felt like they may or may not think were either practical or effective, was a surprise to them on how effective it was when they were having to use it and didn't even have to think about it, to compliance and restraint type holds in order to be able to keep someone in a position to where they can calm them down or get them to a secure area or with additional assistance from someone else. And those things were either surprising or very appreciative that they were a part of the programs that we have to offer. So that kind of sums up everything for me.
Okay. Eric, where's Eric? Eric has gone off to the south. There he is.
Yes, hi. Basically, as I've said earlier, I've only had personal experience and also hearing other instructors talk about their students. And it's basically, I'll start off with what other martial arts instructors have said about their students. It's usually how everybody here has already been talking about the students. Is they mention something that has happened. They may mention a technique or two that the student used. They talk about how this person is doing now, but they never mention names. Everything is anonymous, and they are always supportive of their students. Basically, their idea is they want to make sure that their martial arts training facilities are a safe place for them. If they need to speak with an instructor one-on-one, off to the side, and basically confide in them, these instructors are willing to do that for their students. In my case, I've had numerous confrontations, especially when I was younger and junior high, sixth grade, junior high, because I am hearing impaired. A lot of kids, especially at that age, are just absolutely brutal. So yes, I was bullied up until I got up to high school, and then I got too big. So yeah, they just stopped messing with me. But yeah, it's I've gotten into numerous fights because I was the type of kid that you bully me, okay, I'm gonna fight you. Let's go. And I would explain that to one of my martial arts instructors at that time, and all that he would do is just listen. Sometimes that's all you need, is someone that is willing to listen to you. And yes, some of those techniques really do work, especially even for a kid. It is enough to get these bullies off of me, and that was my experience.
Okay. What I'm picking up, if you've got the tentative topics for today, what I'm picking up is a lot of what is already down here. Necessity of listening, and all of you have said that. Because that's the number, when anyone's having any type of problem, that's your number one task. It's just to listen and not make a value judgment. Except maybe to reassure them, that they did the right thing. And I've had a number of students who've been through this. I taught at a very rough junior high school. A lot of stuff happened off campus. And as I've said, I think before in previous sessions, if I wanted to ask questions, I never used the word why. because why puts you on the defensive. I'd ask, what makes you believe this, or what was the reason for you doing whatever you did? And it many times you'll get a more objective and a better answer to the question than saying, why did you do that? Or why did you feel you have to defend yourself? Why do you have to defend yourself is a moot question. I mean, it's, because I was attacked. The other thing I've picked up here is that some of them may wait a while before they will tell someone, whether it be 1 or 2 weeks, or in Thomas's case, a whole year. They wait, and part of that, and I get this because I have the time to talk with my kids on on several occasions. Part of that is that because they're afraid that they did something wrong, that they're the person that's going to get in trouble. I had one student years ago who was walking through a park one night, which he admitted was a stupid thing to do. And one of his friends, trying to find out what he knew, jumped him from behind, and that friend ended up with permanent brain damage. He felt incredibly bad. I mean, I cannot state how bad he felt about that. And you have to be willing to work with them to, let them know that they're okay and their feelings are legitimate. And in essence, a good sensei is also a good counselor. And that's what I've picked up from some of you as well, is that, you took the time to listen to the student. Some of you asked good questions and you got good answers. And sometimes they're afraid to talk to anyone else because they think you're the only one they can trust. Sometimes that's the case. The one girl I mentioned before who broke some kid's wrist, who pulled a knife on her at a bus stop, she was afraid to tell her parents what had happened. And I spent 15, 20 minutes listening to her, and then I said, well, and I was able to get her to, calm down enough where I said, you're okay, you did nothing wrong, do you want to go to the campus police? And that's what we did. They took care of it, and she was fine. I mean, the point is, you're as a sensei, you're also a parent, an instructor, a counselor, a psychiatrist, a religious person, whatever, hopefully you have a good sense of morals, that's what they look up to. You're all these things to your students, and it's part of the job, for lack of a better phrase. And all of you that spoke have said it, you also spoke without rendering judgment, and that's of critical importance. Because this student is pretty insecure in coming to you anyway, and you don't want to say, well, you did that technique wrong, or you should have done this. They're not after criticism. They're looking for reassurance. And hopefully you can give that to them. Letting others know about what happened is a tough decision for a sensei. As a teacher, public school teacher, I had certain legal obligations. Had that particular girl not wanted to go to the campus police, I still would have had to, because it was in a school situation. And so sometimes you have to, it's always easier to get the other person to initiate what they're going to do to let people know, but sometimes you may be under legal obligation to do so, or you could be in legal trouble. And most of us like to CYA whenever we have to. other thing is they have to, one of the hard parts is I found that students feel bad that they actually injured another person or hurt them. Because jujitsu, there's, very strong philosophy of nonviolence, and, attacking a person is the most demeaning thing you can do as a human being. And they have a tough time accepting what happened, because most human beings don't want to hurt another human being, at least not in their right minds. And so this can take some time, and not necessarily a 20-minute conversation. This conversation may repeat itself a number of times, and you may have to initiate it somewhat. A student comes back to class the next time, say, how are you doing? Are you doing fine? Any other issue? Do you have any questions regarding what happened to you? Let them know that you are there to help them. Until you feel that they are quote unquote back to normal, whatever that is. And that's the hard part for you as an instructor, is to make that, you have to make some judgment calls yourself. Anything else we want to mention on this, or?
Sensei, I've got one other thing just to toss in here. The topic is PTSD. There's another occasion where a student, a longtime student, went to Loyola University and obviously wasn't studying anymore, but carried his knowledge with him, and was walking between dorms in a place that had lots of shrubbery, and all of a sudden a guy appeared and said, "Let me hold your newspaper." Well, my student had the street smarts to know that the next question was going to be, "Let me hold your wallet." And this guy was not alone. He had a person on the side with him. So there were two of them and my student. So he tossed the newspaper at him, followed up with a heel palm. That the guy turned his head slightly and he got his nose in his cheek. They both ran off, and that was the end of it. He didn't have any PTSD. He rather enjoyed telling me the story and kind of smiled about it, like, that was cool. So it doesn't always end up with negative feelings. In his opinion, it's like, I didn't really hurt the guy severely, but I hurt him enough that he didn't want to mess with me anymore. And he didn't get my wallet, but he didn't get my newspaper either.
Okay. I'm not saying that some students, many of them are surprised that the techniques worked. And that they worked so fast. And they didn't think about what they were going to do until after the fact. And I use the term PTSD simply because in some cases, the student really has some emotional issues connected to the situation. As in your case, the a relative who was homosexually attacked. My girl who was attacked with a knife. I mean, we had several conversations after that. My other student who threw his friend, and the friend ended up with permanent brain damage. I mean, these, to some extent, these are heavy burdens to carry. And you have to, as a sensei, Thomas, we got your visual. As a sensei, you will have to be willing to accept this burden, because that's part of your responsibility. Because they see you as, they see you in so many different ways, not just the sensei on the mat. And if you've developed a good sense of trust with your students, which is really critical, they will come to you when they have problems or issues. And it's amazing particularly with kids, how much of a parent you become. And that's okay. You get to learn parenting skills, even if you aren't a parent yet. But anyway, you know,
Yeah,
as Thomas said, the student didn't write to him for a year, and she didn't call the police. Well, it's too late now to call the police, but she, you know, yeah, she probably should have, but that's, you know, that's a moot issue at this point. And you say, okay, you know, life goes on. But you have a lot of roles to play beyond just being an instructor. Sometimes you have to protect your students. And I know I learned a long time ago, there's an old saying, if you keep your mouth shut, you tend to learn a lot of things. And you have to, and you know, I've learned that even from people in, you know, from law enforcement agencies, things of that sort. If you keep your mouth shut, you learn a lot of things, and people will trust you to be discreet in repeating whatever you've heard. And that's a hard judgment call for you as an instructor. If you believe something has happened that's not legal, or for lack of a better phrase, not kosher, or something that's inappropriate, you know, you're then stuck with having to make a judgment call on what you're going to do about it. I found many times that I could go to other sources and relay information without relaying the source. And sometimes they were okay with not having the source. But again, that's a judgment call. And it depends on how much people trust you as a person. And because to some extent, you if someone tells you something confidentially and you're the sensei, your obligation is to protect your student as much as possible, like you would want to protect your own child. And you have to, how do you say, you have to weigh the factors as to what you're going to do. And then one thing I've usually been able to do is, if I you know, when I was a school teacher, I would tell my kids the first day, these are things that I have to notify the administration about. And I'd go through the list just so they knew. And I said, and there are other things I have some discretion on. But one thing I would always do is that if I made the decision that I was going to have to tell someone else, I always let the student know first. And I let them know that I'm not going to mention any names. This is, I don't, as far as you're concerned, I don't know where I got the information from. And usually that's, if people trust you as the instructor, it's amazing that they will trust what you say. And I know some of you may say that's not ethical, or that's bending the rules, or other things of that sort. But if you can protect your students, that's your primary goal. And if you can do it without getting in legal hot water, that's even better. So what else?
I'll just throw in real quickly, and this is anecdotal, I guess, inspiration for me with starting or not starting certain martial arts. I don't have any direct experience being attacked or having students having been attacked, but in the cane, I've been training in cane for the last couple of years, the crook cane as a self-defense device. And I was inspired by the story of the sensei who started the entire system, which was that he was visiting a relative of his in Florida. And there was a group of women senior women in their, I guess, their 70s or 80s, many of whom had canes, and they were attacked by a group of thugs and badly beaten up, and some of them were raped, and this terrible stuff happened. And it struck this sensei as terrible that these women all had this potential self-defense device that they didn't have any idea how to use. And he started an entire system based on the application of the cane to use it as a self-defense device, especially for older people. And I thought it's a terrible thing to have based a terrible incident to have based a system on, but it's so needed. And that just struck me as a graphic, but a very moving story, and maybe with some good outcomes. So not exactly related to the question, but very inspirational for me.
I think you bring up a very valid point, is that some of the other senseis that mentioned that, students, they were surprised that the techniques worked as they did. They put different techniques together. Their training worked. I even have had one black belt who used to teach, and I've done it. I think I did it in one of my summer seminars on how to use physical objects around you as defensive tools, and protect yourself. A knocked over trash can while you're running down an alley can be a good obstacle to someone who's chasing you. And it's just having the presence of mind, but also, as you said, Tom, they've had enough training so they know how to use this thing, whether it be a cane or a can of pressurized whipped cream, or, you can find the stupidest stuff in the kitchen that can be used as defensive weapons. It's just having, the awareness,
right,
to use your environment to help you protect yourself. And
situational awareness being such that the overriding issue, not getting into a situation that's dangerous at first, but then thinking, what's here that I can use if I am in a terrible crisis?
Right. It's more of, I guess, what you call situational awareness. But if you've had some training, you kind of become aware of this.
Sensei, I think that a key point that you made, and Thomas touched on it as well, was the quote of presence of mind. We often talk about situational awareness, and that is one of the more common topics of self-defense that you see out there. But what we fail, or what I've not heard often at all, is the term, presence of mind. Situational awareness is one thing, but without the presence of mind, then you're still not aware of certain things that you can use to your benefit in the effort to defend yourself.
Yes.
I think those two terminologies are separate in itself, but very, very important. We often talk about situational awareness, but we never say presence of mind.
Yeah. Okay. What do you mean by presence of mind? Unless I missed your definition.
No. I was saying that in presence of mind, you could be aware of your current surroundings, your current scenario or potential threat that you may have. But if you don't have the presence of mind to be able to use certain things that could help you in defense or defend yourself, then you're still kind of falling short of giving yourself the best opportunity to defend yourself. So having the presence of mind and understanding I can use something or I can do something, such as taking something and putting it in a way, a trash can, like you had mentioned, or another object that is anything that is the extension of the body, or to interfere or to be able to use as a part of the self-defense. If you don't have that presence of mind, which is different than the situational awareness part.
Okay. And that's, I agree with you. If and we're going to make that future topic. Anyway, as to what can do. Okay, that is so important. I mean, you have to, how do you, for lack of a better phrase, you have to be there mentally, and you know, awareness of your surroundings is one thing, but having the presence of mind or the to what can I do? And one of the things we do with our students, and we started, it's the second week of class this time. I started with, some of you know I use a thing called deer in the headlights training. And that is when they're attacked, to do something. It doesn't matter, even if it's turn and run, but do something rather than staying there, because that, as you said, that presence of mind, your attacker is hoping that you don't have that. And that gives the attacker someplace between a half second or 1.5 seconds lead time on you. And that puts you in a bad situation. Because all of you know as sensei that, you know, a half second or 1.5 seconds is a lot of time in terms of technique execution. And so that presence of mind is absolutely essential, and it doesn't matter. How do you say? I don't want to say it doesn't matter what you do, but it's more important to say it's important that you do something. And that presence of mind allows you to do that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that presence of mind, I think, is a good way to use like an English phrase to describe like Zanshin and Mushin kind of mixed together, right? So it's kind of like, to me, what I'm getting is maybe a good way to describe Zanshin and Mushin is being able to clearly think about everything that's happening around you in the moment without thinking about your thoughts. Like, don't evaluate your thoughts, but make sure you're having them. Like, I could take this broomstick and hit him in the head with it. Not, yeah, but should I? Is that escalating this? You know what I mean? Like, just, I can use this to do this. Boom. You know?
Right.
I think that's kind of what we're talking about, right? With the presence of mind, is like having the clarity of sight and doing it without thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's topic number 5 right now. So we will get there. I mean, one of the nice things about these discussions is that they tend to segue into so many other things that are sometimes already on the list. But yes, okay. Is there anything else we want to do with this topic? I mean, it's more important for students, for sensei who have not been in this situation, to have some idea of what to do. Because you don't want to say, you should have told your parents, or you should have called the police, or you don't want to be making these value judgments. Because you know, I'm going to say this, you know from your own experience, when people tell you should have, that's a turnoff. You should have done this, you should have done that, you shouldn't have done that. You know, the should have, shouldn't have doesn't help the immediate situation. Maybe
you can, sorry to interrupt. You can easily turn that turn that around and say, instead of saying you should have, you can easily say, would you like to? It would be a good idea to do this or to do that.
Right.
You can guide them, and oftentimes students need that. They're still trapped in that moment. That as soon as they're asking for guidance in some cases, and steering them in the right direction it can help them move forward past the incident that occurred, and in a way get closure.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's not, many times in life, it's not what you say, but how you say it. And if you can give students, if you can make them feel that they have the power to make choices and make decisions for lack of a better phrase, you're empowering them, which helps them develop their self-confidence. Because most kids and adults know what the right thing is to do. And sometimes they just need some reassurance that it's okay to do the right thing. And you know, so your guidance, and sometimes, you know, if you say, and I've been through this a number of times, do you think you should, if I say, do you think you should let your parents know? And sometimes they'll come back to me and they'll say, no. And then my next question is going to be, well, what are your reasons? And sometimes they have very legitimate reasons. You know, would you like to talk to your counselor about, you know, if you have different ways of getting them to communicate what happened to someone else, they may, you know, if they feel reassured, if they feel okay about it, then I don't want to say you've done your job, but they will have a greater respect for you and a greater trust in you, because you're trusting in them to make hopefully the right decisions as well. So it's kind of like it's a two-way street, like any relationship. Anyway, anything else we want to do with this, or any other comments? Or Charles, you want to get your 2 cents in on here? Or yeah, we don't have any audio for you.
No, it's fine. No, I'm fine to move on. Let's go ahead.
Okay. Okay, our next topic is a little easier. Teaching in a commercial dojo versus a community center agency. How many of, I'm going to ask, how many of you are teaching in your own commercial dojo or teaching in someone else's commercial dojo? Okay, we got Darren. Anyone else? Got to go across the screen. Anyone? Nope. Okay. How many of you have or are teaching through community agencies?
I suppose I am. I didn't think of it that way, but yes.
Okay. There is a difference. Okay. If you're in a commercial dojo, I mean, you have to, you know, there are city laws and regulations you have to meet. You have to be, you know, financially viable. But beyond that, you can basically, unless I'm wrong, and Darren will correct me, you can basically do almost anything you want as long as it's legal. You know, and I'm not going to ask Darren to explain how he runs his business, but you have, to some extent, you have a lot more freedom. On the other hand, you have to meet certain city requirements, legal requirements.
Sensei, if I could jump in real quick, because
Sure.
it looks like I'm starting to lose a little bit of connectivity here, and I want to make a couple comments as some of the things that you had just said. Yeah, we have a bunch of different freedoms. The spot that I call my home dojo, the Zanshin Dojo in Mandeville, Louisiana. We have all the freedom that we that we want to, right? We're kind of a little bit hidden. We're not like on the main part of the street. It's a building behind a building. It's an elevated building. It's a good part of town, but it's not really. It's kind of like in a rural area almost, but in an industrial part. So it has high traffic, but we don't have frontage like a storefront area to be able to see it unless you know that it's there. There is a sign out front. It is a lit sign, but unless you're actively looking for a dojo, you really don't see anything. So why I'm saying all of that is because during the pandemic, when there were shutdowns or restrictions to be able to train and stuff like that, we still did offer things we still followed the CDC guidelines and all of those things for safety and health concerns, but we weren't really kind of being policed by the authorities or people trying to uphold the current scenario of restrictions that were going on all over the place. So with that, what I did was I still kept the dojo kind of open, but I did it on a very restricted scenario. Like I was able to go in there and do Zoom classes or virtual classes, and from time to time I would be able to allow 1, 2, even 3 or 4 people to be in there. We had plenty enough space to kind of stay socially distanced apart, and still be able to participate without kind of engaging or interacting with each other in close quarters. So from that regard, yes, we were able to continue to do things that weren't putting us in a position to be able to kind of do everything else that, the normal restrictions were out there for. So that kind of works out good for us. I mean, I feel like that's a good thing. And we have an exclusive club as well.
Okay. Speaking in terms of community agencies, I've taught through YMCAs. I've taught through 2 cities, different cities with different policies. One of the things, if you do work through a community agency, you do have to follow their policies. I know when we came back from being with the city of Santa Cruz, being closed down for 2 years due to COVID, they wanted us to wear face masks. And I said, okay, we can do that, but they're going to get knocked off a lot. And then it becomes a safety hazard trying to put them back on. And so they said, well, okay, face masks, we won't require them. You have, Darren, don't have any audio on you. But anyway, it's, I mean,
No, sensei.
Oops. I mean, that's a small thing. If you're working through a community agency, you need to know where they're at. I know, and I don't mean to pick on YMCAs. Their leadership. This is from.
Oh, please pick on YMCAs.
Yeah. I'm going to say this from personal experience. Okay. They either are really competent or really incompetent. There's not much in between. The YMCA that I initially taught through, their athletic director was, someone called, the parents met with him. We met with him in a group. It was a scheduling issue. And ultimately the parents said, can you take your program to the parks department? And we did, and it flourished just as well there. The Y wasn't happy, but I'm trying to leave a lot of details out. But you do, you can run into some people that really mess things up for you if you work through a community agency. And sometimes with the community, the only positive thing with the community agency, and I learned this as a teacher, is that if someone makes a decision that you don't like, if there's someone who's above them, you can always go above their head. And sometimes it will work out for you and sometimes it won't. But if you keep it professional, that's the key, okay, and not personalize it, then you're more likely to be successful. The other thing is some other things. Some community agencies will require that you carry your own insurance, liability insurance. And thank God for the AJA. That has really made our insurance expense like almost negligible. When we first started teaching, and the city of Burbank required insurance in the early 90s or late 80s, our insurance company said, why don't you since you're working through a community agency, why don't you become a 501c3 nonprofit? You know, you can still pay yourselves a salary, but it will really cut down your insurance costs. So we switched over and it cut our insurance premium down by 2/3.
I just throw in here, George, that to also support the AJA insurance policy, that if you do a demonstration or a seminar outside of a dojo, as I've done at work, I work for a quasi-governmental organization. It's extremely liability sensitive, and I've done very, very basic demonstrations to groups of people there. When I suggested that initially, anybody who's gotten anywhere near government agencies, there's enormous pushback if you're demonstrating anything physical to anybody because they're terrified that somebody's going to injure themselves. But with AJA, the AJA insurance, the liability coverage extended to demonstrations outside of the AJA or dojo environments, and I was covered. And once I told them that, I could go ahead and do the demonstration. So it does have enormous benefits.
Right. And the AJA policy, I mean, I've got where I want to do something someplace else, even on short term. I've contacted the AJA or the insurance company, and they quickly add a element to the policy that covers where I'm at. So it's having a good liability protection insurance company is very critical if you're dealing with a community agency that requires it. The other thing is that some places, if you're hired as, and this is not legal advice, if you're hired as an employee of that agency, that's one thing. But if you are a quote unquote volunteer instructor, and you do not have your own insurance, you need to make sure, this will get some people upset, and it's happened with me once. I said, can I see the policy where it says that I am covered under your policy, even though I am a volunteer instructor? Because in many policies, volunteer instructors are not covered. And you need to protect yourself. So that's one thing that's another thing is very critical. If you are in a community agency, they may have their own participant release. The city of Santa Clarita has its own participant release for anyone who comes in any of their programs. They've also allowed us to have our own participant release. And so it's probably a good idea to have something specific to your activity. And again, this is something, I mean, I can send you copies of the release I use, probably pretty close to what the AJA uses. But if you don't have a release, you need to check with an attorney in your state to make sure that it protects you. Okay. There's only been one instance with the city of Santa Clarita where someone came to the city and said that they had been injured and they wanted the city to pay for it, and the city didn't even look at our release or liability. They simply told the person to go take a hike. because it's not as politely as I said it, but essentially what happens if you work for a community agency, they are the deep pockets. If you're, and that's why some of them are so paranoid, as Thomas said, about someone getting hurt, because they could really be sued. And if they've been negligent, they're up the creek. It doesn't matter if it's a broken toenail. So those are some things you need to be aware of. Also, before I end here, the participant release I use has what's called a what is it here? Authorization to consent to treatment of minor. In many cases, it depends on your state law. If a child is brought into a hospital for emergency care, the hospital cannot do anything except keep the kid alive unless they have parental permission to proceed. At least that's the way it's in California. Okay, so all of my participant agreements also have a consent to treatment of minor. How many times have I used it in 56 years? Once. And that was a humorous situation. It was during lunch at junior high school. Two of my students, a boyfriend and girlfriend, were practicing, and she put a headlock on him on the ground, and he decided he was going to get out, and she held on to the headlock. Paramedic, I mean, his neck was his pain. We had to restrain him, keep him down. Paramedics from a backboard took him to the hospital. His parents showed up 2 or 3 hours later. They had been out of town. Nobody could get in touch with them. This is before cell phones. And they were so grateful that permission to treat a minor was part of the paperwork they had to sign. And what happened to the kid? He turned out to have a pulled neck muscle. But he had a great deal more respect for his girlfriend. As I always told my male students in school, don't mess around with the girls. They are just as strong as you are. They just don't show it. Anyway, so so these are some things you need to be aware of. And sometimes the facilities that you get in a community facility are not the greatest. One of the downsides is that we have our own mats, and I usually replace 2 to 4 mats a year, just to make sure we have good mats being used, and the old mats students buy. But in all those situations, the city has always said we are not responsible for what happens to your mats, and we've had to accept that. We've lost 2 mats since 96. When we started up here, we've lost 2 mats. And the city was very cooperative in trying to help us find out who took them. They had a good idea, but unless you can prove it. Anyhow, so those are some things if you're working for a community agency. You can restrict by age. You can do restrictions by physical limitations. You can, if you feel someone is inappropriate for the class, either because of their behavior, or you can exclude them, and the city will usually support you if you're legitimate. We had one person who came in a couple of years ago. He crossed out half the release, and we said, and he says, I can't go along with a lot of this stuff now. I said, well, you can't modify the release, so you have a choice: either fill out a complete release, or the city will give you your money back. And the city gave him his money back. You need, if you're working for an agency, you need to know what your limits are and what you can and cannot do. We had one person who came in and he had taken off his leather jacket, and he was looking through the release and asking questions about it. In the meantime, I lifted up his jacket to move it, and it was heavy. So I reached in one of his pockets to squeeze it from the outside first, and he had a roll of quarters. And if you live in a metropolitan area and a person has a roll of quarters or nickels in their coat pocket, you know what that's there for. It's not brass knuckles, but it's pretty close. And so we encouraged him not to continue, not to take the class. And was that subjective? Yes, but there's an attitude that goes along with that roll of quarters. And I wasn't willing to take that risk for my students. And I felt the city would support me. So anyway, there are times when you, as an instructor, you have to make judgment calls. Anyway, anything else for community agency? Thomas, you want to add anything? I know I dealt very shortly with Thomas Salander. I know I dealt very shortly with incompetence because I didn't want to specify anything in particular. But even with the city of Santa Clarita, I've run into some people that, and even the insurance company. Where's Thomas Deneen? When we first started and had to get insurance, the insurance company wanted us to wear protective gear, headgear, hand, and foot, the whole.
And for every class doing whatever techniques, not just during competition.
They wanted it for everything.
It's hard enough getting people to wear cups, which I think are just second nature, and much less headgear or anything more serious.
Well, Seki had a good way of dealing with that. He'd have everyone line up, and he'd take a hand bow, and every several weeks he'd just do a love tap and then crotches. and everyone wore a cup in his class.
It just takes one bad kick to really change your life.
And you can't do that today. But this was back in the 60s. But in any case, to be serious, I said, we do a lot of body movement and joint twists, etc. And if you've got all this protective gear on you, you can't feel the body. And what's going to happen is you're going to end up with a much higher rate of injuries and claims. And they hemmed and hawed a bit. And they said, okay, we'll try it for a year. And we didn't have any injury. So they went with it. But sometimes people will come up with and this applies to many other things in life, they'll come up with the stupidest reasons not to do something, or to put roadblocks in your way.
Yeah. And there's the additional concern when you start wearing a lot of protective equipment is that you have higher expectations that nothing can happen to you because you're wearing protective equipment, and then you up the level of contact. It's like saying, well, now that I'm driving this SUV, I'm safe, therefore I can take more chances or not be as careful when I'm driving through the snow, and it just ups the stakes and you take stupid chances. Yeah.
Until you run into a diesel truck.
We had a problem with our executive director. The executive directors for a long time were overturning every 2 years, I think, something like that. And there was a point where they were saying this was an unsafe practice, and they did not want the class in their dojo or in the Y because it was going to get too many people hurt. And the person directly between the executive director and me, forgot what her title was. They also rotated through frequently. She went back and looked at the injury rate and was able to show that the what was it, it wasn't a yoga class, it was a Pilates class just before us, had a higher injury rate than we did. We had one broken bone and one strained wrist in 20 years. And it was much higher for the Pilates class. And that was the end of the discussion with the YMCA for, oh, you're too dangerous. My point to them was, look, we knew it was dangerous, and we tell people it's dangerous, and we make them mindful that it's dangerous, and you're not doing that with your Pilates class, and that's the difference.
Right.
That brings to mind, and this is a broader discussion, but if something's designed to counter violence or is explicitly involving violence, which our techniques do, it just has that atmosphere where people assume that it's more dangerous or likely to cause injury. And you can extend that thinking to weapons in culture, in that many times more people die in swimming pool accidents and car accidents than die through gunfire in the United States. But because guns are designed to kill people, or kill animals at least, then they're surrounded by the atmosphere of violence and killing. Therefore, they must be more dangerous, and that's not necessarily correct thinking. And the same can apply to martial arts practice.
And there are times, I remember when we went to the city of Santa Clarita, initially we were told, well, the city already has a jiu-jitsu program. We don't need another one. And at that point, I decided to go over the person's head and requested a meeting with the whoever the head of the parks department was, and that person was there too. And I said, I came in, I said, and what is your concern? And they said, we already have one jiu-jitsu program. I said, and you also have 3 karate programs. So why can't you have 2 jiu-jitsu programs? And then the response was, well, we don't have mats. And so I said, well, if we provide the mats, is there anything else? Is there anything else that you want from us that, you feel that would keep us? And the person couldn't. So sometimes you just have to, how do you say, you have to look at the logic of what the other side's argument is, as Thomas said. I had an instance when I taught junior high where 2 brown belts did a rear Hasami, where you scissor across the waist and knock the person backwards. And for one reason, one of these they both knew how you had to fall. They're both brown belts. One of them, for some reason, he told me after, I just wanted to see what would happen if I went forward instead of backwards. And so what happened was he fractured his femur and both bones in the lower leg. Okay. And I immediately sent a kid down the office to call paramedics. And we had a assistant principal who I did not get along with anyway. And he came into the room. He told them not to call paramedics. He wanted to check to see if the leg was really broken. And so once he came in the room, I just immediately sent another kid out and said, you call paramedics on my dime, on my authority. And so the office did. He wanted to find out, he wanted to straighten the kid's leg out to see if it was broken. And what ensued was a 10-minute argument between him and me in front of 38 kids. Until the paramedics showed up. They were across the street, because that's where the fire department was, and they told him if he had tried to straighten out the kid's leg, it would have put a simple, what they call still a simple fracture, even though all 3 bones were broken. into a compound fracture because a femur would have pierced the skin in the student's thigh. Yeah, thigh. The kid was actually back on the mat in 4 weeks with a leg cast, but he was back on the mat. The principal was not happy. When the principal came back to school that day, he was not happy with what had happened. He was not happy with the assistant principal. But in any case, you know, there are times when you have to stand up for what you believe is right. And the same thing, it goes all the way back to when you have a student who's trusting in you to do the right thing. If they are having an issue, okay, you have to be willing to do the right thing, and they will respect you for that. And unfortunately, that particular kid who had the multiple fracture, fortunately, he went into shock right away. He was conscious, but he did not feel any pain, which was amazing. And I treated him for shock because I saw the leg and I said, I'm not, we're not going to touch that. So, you know, and that's the importance of first aid training. And I know, and I know some people who have worked for YMCAs, they don't want you to touch the person or do anything. And sometimes you as an instructor have to say, I'm responsible for his safety. And it may be a matter of, you know, rather than finding out if the injury is serious or not, is if you believe the injury is serious, paramedics need to be called. And that's a hard decision to make. It becomes, how do you say, I don't want to say it does become easier the more often you do it. That's a real cop-out answer. But the first time you have to call a paramedic, it really is a scary thing. But at some point you realize it's the right thing to do. And that's why first aid training is so necessary. Sometimes it may be a matter of just having the person get off the mat. You know, they tweak their shoulder, they tweak their wrist or something of that sort. And it's just a matter of helping them off the mat. Do they want to sit, you know, can you sit down in a chair and have someone monitor them? And, you know, if they start to feel sick to their stomach or anything of that sort, or cold, to have that person who's monitoring let you know right away. Because at that point, if any of those symptoms come up, which are symptoms of shock, you need to call paramedics for their safety. And sometimes the paramedics will come and they'll do their thing. They'll say, you know, you're okay, your heart's okay, yada, yada, yada. You really should probably see a doctor tomorrow. They don't always take the person away on a gurney, and, you know, which is a much heavier duty. But, you know, you need to, how do you say, I don't want to say you need to CYA, but you need to CYA. And students will appreciate that in the long run. So anyway, we got into a lot of side issues here. Okay.
Sensei, we had something happen in our karate dojo that might be worth mentioning here. We're talking about injuries that you can see in the days before concussion protocols. We wore these 1.5 inch thick neoprene helmets as sparring. And the idea was that you had a protective coating around your head so you could be hit harder. Well, it didn't stop the coup contra coup boxing injuries. And after a couple of years of wearing these helmets, our sensei realized that people were hitting harder because of the helmets, and the brain was still getting sloshed worse than if you didn't wear the helmet. So we went without helmets, and instead of hitting 50% plus power, people went back down to 25% plus power, and fewer people left the dojo with walking concussions.
Yeah,
And those are injuries you can't see. But I remember walking around in a daze for 2 days after a 25-minute sparring session. And later, it fit the description of what's called a walking concussion.
right, yeah, how do you say, in some cases, protective gear is counterproductive.
Correct. That's exactly the point we're making.
And the one other thing, yeah, and one thing you also have to be aware of is that sometimes I will find people taping themselves up before class, etc. Which to me is okay, as long as they let me know what the problem, I want to know what the problem is, because I may restrict what they're doing just to avoid them causing further injury or the potential of further injury. But there are some people who will wear a supporter on their knee or elbow all the time, and you kind of have to let them know, one, if you're wearing it all the time, you need to get medical attention. And number two, if you're wearing it all the time, it's actually weakening the joint, because the body is relying on this device for support rather than the body itself. And just try and get them to get the concept. The one other thing I wanted to have you consider if you're going into a community program is if you can set yourself up as a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, charitable foundation. Reason for this, and I'll go back to the insurance company, is if you're a nonprofit, because you are an employee or a volunteer, registered volunteer within the corporation, your liability goes way down unless you actually did something openly negligent. It's legal protection for you as an individual. And that's why the insurance rate goes down. Also, most lawyers know that you can't make money out of a nonprofit if you sue it, because they usually don't have that much in assets. And they can't come after you as an individual because you are either employee or registered volunteer of the nonprofit. So anyway, that's just, a word of advice. Is it difficult to do? Yes, it can be challenging, but it's not difficult. The IRS was very helpful, surprisingly. State of California, because we had to incorporate as a nonprofit corporation, was very helpful. And it was just a matter of doing the paperwork. That's the only thing that took time. And no one likes paperwork. But it's something you might want to consider. Anyway, so we're down to martial artist outside the dojo. Do we want to get into that today, or we want to leave that for next time? Any thinking?
That's a great topic, and I think it deserves more time than we have right now to cover that.
I agree.
That's a tremendous topic and a great starting place.
Okay, that's where we'll start next week. Next time.
It really just sounds like you can really explore this topic and how you're going to expand an outdoors dojo in case you can't afford an indoors dojo.
Yeah, I mean there are so many. Yeah, there are a lot of elements to it. It's like the topics we had today. We got segued into a number of other side topics that were really worthwhile, and one of them is going to become a future topic after. What do we have here now? We have 17. We have 15 topics left to discuss, and this will become number 60, which is the presence of mind, and developing that skill. Anyways, so with that in mind, that's all we're going to cover then today. And we'll see. The next session will be on, let me check here. Gotta find a calendar that's has the February 4th will be our next meeting. So if any of you have some additional topics you'd like to send me, I welcome them. And I want to thank those of you who participated well today. Dane, we will get to Sanshin and Mushin. And what was the third one? Mokuso. Because they're all related. Maybe on the 4th, if not on the 4th, on the 18th, most definitely. So it's coming. And I've had some people that have put in topics and they say, we're going to talk about it next time. And I'll say, one person had to say, your topic is probably about 3 months down on the list.
It's okay because these are all eternal topics, eternally relevant.
Yeah, they're all eternal topics. And he says, can I move it up? And I said, well, if one of the other board members, one of the other participants, or two of the other participants look at this list and they think something should be moved up, then I'll move it up. That's what happened to the PTSD thing. Because if a few of us think it's a more critical issue, then maybe we need to deal with it more immediately. So, and that's a power or right that all of you have. Just as an FYI for your information. So I hope you have a good weekend. And we'll see you on the 4th of February. And I think that is about it. So Charles, thank you for joining us. And Thomas, thank you for joining us. It was good to see you and hear from you. And
are you in Ireland, Thomas? Or are you back in the United States? The rumor has it you were retiring to Ireland.
The rumor is correct, but I am now back in the United States.
Yeah. So that I think that's about it. So wish you a good weekend. Take care. Don't do anything too dangerous. And that's about it. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Sensei.
Take care. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.